She didn't scream, she didn't threaten. There was no public meltdown, no dramatic walkout, no camera-ready confrontation. Instead, Janelle Brown did something far more powerful. She simply said no, no cameras, no special episode. And with that one decision, she silenced not just a network, but an entire legacy. For 18 seasons, we've seen Janelle keep the peace. We've seen her sit through chaotic family meetings, nodding through Kody's endless monologues, offering logic when emotions ran wild. But behind those quiet eyes, something was always building. And now, it has finally broken through. Her silence isn't a submission, it's a warning shot. And what makes it even more chilling is that no one saw it coming. When news began to leak, small, scattered whispers at first, that Janelle was not only planning a wedding, but refusing to film it, most people thought it couldn't be true. Janelle, the responsible one, the backbone of the Brown clan, not recording her walk into a new life, but it was true. And the impact of that silence cut deeper than any words could ever do. Because here's what longtime viewers understand, and what the network likely feared deep down the moment the news dropped. Every time Janelle showed up on screen, she gave credibility to the show. She was the calm in the storm, the adult in the room. She tolerated the dysfunction, not because she was weak, but because she saw the bigger picture. Family, unity, resilience. So when she chose to close the door on the story, she didn't just walk away from Kody, she walked away from the entire sister-wives structure, and it hit like a silent bomb. You could almost hear the panic ripple behind the scenes, producers realizing the arc they'd been counting on was gone. No wedding special, no final send-off, no ratings boost from the moment fans have been begging for, just nothing. And that nothing was louder than any speech Kody could have possibly made. The silence wasn't empty, it was intentional. And in that quiet move, Janelle reclaimed something she hadn't had in decades: complete control. Here's where it gets even more intense. Her decision wasn't just hard on the production team, it completely knocked Kody off balance. Because for years, he believed he held all the narrative power. But now, he's the one being left out of the story. He's not invited. He's not even allowed to perform his heartbreak for the cameras. And for a man used to centering himself in every emotional moment, being erased from the frame, that's unbearable. It wasn't shouting that broke him, it was the calm shutting of a door. And while the wedding is quiet, the fallout is anything but. Robyn reportedly in crisis, TLC executives scrambling, the rest of the family stunned. But Janelle, she's finally breathing, away from the glare, away from the weight, away from the chaos of a life that demanded everything but gave so little back. What's most shocking isn't what we saw on screen, it's what we didn't. So the biggest question now is, if the cameras aren't rolling, who controls the truth? And if Janelle's writing her own story without us watching, what does that say about everything we've believed until now? Get ready, because this silence might be the loudest twist the show has ever had. And it's only the beginning. Before she said no, before she banned the cameras and closed the door on the world that watched her for nearly 2 decades, Janelle Brown said yes. Again and again and again. Yes to being the steady one. Yes to swallowing her pride to keep things going. Yes to building a dream that never really included her. Because that's what they don't show you in the flashy promos or the family introductions. They don't show you the weight Janelle carried for everyone else. How she signed over house proceeds to help them move. How she cashed out her retirement so decisions could be made, decisions that often left her on the sidelines while others lived in comfort. She worked from sunrise to exhaustion, commuting hours over snowy Utah roads while her spiritual husband played patriarch on TV. She ran the numbers, paid the bills, stressed over groceries so their kids could have security, all while Kody spiraled between houses, emotions, and plans that never seemed to land. She was the one who didn't need the spotlight, not because she didn't deserve it, but because she'd convinced herself that being in the background was her role. Let Mary wrestle for first wife status. Let Christine push back and cry. Let Robyn take the throne. Janelle, she got used to the silence. She believed, maybe for too long, that logic would win, that patience would be enough, that when they finally settled down, she would have her fair share of peace. But peace never came. And Coyote Pass became more than land. It became a promise unfulfilled. She saved for it. She lived in an RV on it. She fought for it. While Kody fantasized about building 5 houses, Janelle was the one figuring out how to afford water tanks and permits. She wasn't the dreamer, she was the person left behind to clean up the wreckage of broken plans. And still, she stayed. Because when you're that deep in a family system like theirs, leaving feels impossible. You convince yourself you're doing it for the kids, for the image, for heaven. You don't realize the slow erosion of self until it's almost too late. But something began shifting, not on the surface, but inside her. A soft undoing of everything she thought she had to be. And as she watched Christine leave, not in rage but in relief, something clicked. She saw that joy was possible, that boundaries were allowed, that sacrifice didn't have to be the full story. She had played the rulebook faithfully: quiet love, loyalty without demand, financial support without recognition. And in return, when she needed partnership, when their sons needed a father, Kody gave her ultimatums, loyalty tests, and silence. She had done everything right in a system that was built wrong. That's why her wedding isn't just a moment of personal freedom. It's a full rewrite. It's a declaration that the rules never worked the way she was told. When you've spent your life giving support like scaffolding, it's easy to forget how to stand alone. But Janelle isn't falling apart. She's remembering she has bones of her own. And she's finally ready to build something real, without someone else writing the blueprint. The foundation may have taken years to crumble, but her next step is already solid. And someone else is about to feel the aftershock. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a dramatic exit with suitcases in hand. The breaking point came quietly, but you could feel it in the room. The air thick, the energy off. Janelle wasn't just frustrated. She was done. You could see it in her eyes. Something had shifted, and this time there was no fixing it. The final encounter captured by TLC cameras didn't show fists pounding or furniture flying. It showed something worse, a love that had hollowed out, a connection that had become impossible to fake. Janelle sat across from him, jaw tight, arms folded, her usual calm replaced by stillness, not the peaceful kind, the exhausted kind. And Kody, arms flailing, voice rising, was unraveling not because he was losing her, but because he could no longer control the story. That conversation around the holidays, that's when everything frayed. Kody had been pulling away from the kids, especially the boys, especially her boys. Janelle had stood by quietly for years, but when he talked to her like all of it was her fault, when he called her disloyal because she wouldn't force her sons to grovel for his attention after he abandoned them during the pandemic, that's when it cracked. Because what father demands loyalty instead of offering love? What husband thinks parenting ends when loyalty wanes? Janelle said it best herself. You act like it's just loyalty, that I have to choose between you and my kids. And in that moment, when his answer wasn't, of course your kids come first, but instead a lecture about respect, something sealed shut inside her. The woman who once negotiated peace between wives had nothing left to negotiate. The cameras tried to make sense of it, but you could tell it wasn't about that one fight. It wasn't even about the boys anymore. It was years of decisions, tiny betrayals, missed birthdays, unanswered calls. It was the way Robyn became the center of his world while the rest of them made do with what crumbs were left when the mansion door closed. Even as Janelle tried to keep her voice steady, you could hear it, grief turning into clarity. Her face didn't show fire, it showed frost, numbness, and Kody didn't know what to do with that. He knew how to argue with tears, how to fight with Mary's anger or Christine's defiance. But Janelle didn't yell. She withdrew, and that scared him more than anything. Because when someone who's given everything goes quiet, stares at you like a stranger, it means they're deciding what they won't give anymore. Behind those cameras, beyond what we saw, insiders say that Janelle left that encounter and didn't look back. No closure talk, no marriage counseling session booked. She started making moves with her money, her paperwork, and her plans. She wasn't protecting him anymore, not to the producers, not to the press, and most importantly, not to herself. Janelle had finally crossed the one line she spent decades tiptoeing around. The boundary where self-sacrifice stops feeling like love and starts feeling like self-erasure. Because when silence replaces excuses, it's already over. And soon, the name would be too. There was no judge, no legal filing, no box marked final decree. But make no mistake, Janelle Brown got divorced, not in a courtroom with pens and papers. She divorced him emotionally, spiritually, and completely. And the moment he realized it, when the words stopped and the warmth disappeared, he knew something he never wanted to admit was true. She was gone, and he never heard the door close. This wasn't a dramatic announcement. There was no press release from TLC, no emotional sit-down with all the wives at once. Janelle didn't gather the family. She didn't cry on the couch. Her goodbye looked nothing like Christine's. It was quiet. But underneath that quiet was a long simmering fury she had been pushing down for decades. All those years, she believed in the promise. That spiritual marriage meant something. That their celestial bond, sealed not with documents but by eternity, would eventually be enough. But what happens when the man who promised you forever starts treating you like a burden in the present? What happens when the foundation of faith turns into a leash he still expects you to hold? There was a moment, subtle but devastating, when viewers saw the invisible divorce unfold. Kody spoke of loyalty like it was love. He spoke of respect like it was obedience. He told Janelle what she needed to do to have peace, but never listened to what she needed to feel heard, and she finally stopped responding. One of the most chilling scenes of the later season shows Janelle listening to him, arms crossed, blank-faced, not because she didn't care, but because she had nothing left to argue. She wasn't negotiating anymore. She was deciding how far away she needed to be to feel whole again. This divorce didn't happen with gavel bangs or camera crews following her into another man's arms. It happened in her heart, when the most loyal and pragmatic wife decided she no longer believed in the system she helped hold together. To Kody, divorce meant scandal, a mess to clean up in front of the world. But this was worse for him, because Janelle gave him the one punishment he couldn't perform for the cameras: indifference. She left without making a scene. She left without even slamming the door. And the silence after that was louder than anything she could have screamed. When a woman makes peace with walking away from a life she helped build, it isn't just a separation. It's a spiritual uncoupling. She didn't just remove herself from a marriage. She removed herself from the belief that it was ever worth saving. And now, long before the wedding to come, the weight of that invisible divorce is already tearing through what's left of the Brown family. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't a social media announcement with a glowing photo and a rebirth caption. It was more like a whisper, a leak. At first, no one knew what to make of it, but it spread fast and it hit hard. Janelle Brown had changed her name, quietly, without a ceremony, without a discussion, without telling him. For years, Janelle carried that name like an anchor. She wore it through pregnancies, parenting, public scandal, and emotional starvation. She wore it when it hurt. She wore it when she didn't feel seen. And now, she's done carrying the weight. And for Kody, this was the moment it all slipped through his fingers. Because it wasn't the cameras shutting off that cut deepest, it was the signature on a form he never saw that told the real story. Janelle Brown is no longer Janelle Brown. She didn't wait for his approval. She didn't warn the network. She didn't script it for an emotional episode reveal. She simply erased the last connection that tied her to the legacy they built. And the message was deafening: I owe you nothing now. To understand why that hits so hard, you have to understand their faith. In their religious world, the name is more than symbolic, it's spiritual. Taking a husband's name isn't a matter of convenience, it's a covenant. A connection beyond death. By rejecting it, Janelle wasn't just opting out of a shared past, she was opting out of his afterlife. And for a man obsessed with control, with spiritual legacy, with eternal kingdom talk, this was the final blow. The leak reportedly reached TLC before Janelle ever mentioned it out loud. Some say it came through legal documents related to Coyote Pass. Others say the production team found out when they tried to script questions for upcoming interviews and realized, by law, she was no longer one of them. And the reaction behind the scenes? Pivot mode. TLC suddenly had a season without a main character, a storyline without an ending, a wife who refused to play her final scene on script. And Kody, word is he exploded. Not because she chose to move on, but because she didn't give him the chance to perform it. He didn't get to pretend to be supportive. He didn't get the redemption footage. Because once again, the cameras were off. He wanted a storyline. She chose a silence that bites deeper than anything filmed. And what makes this even more shocking is that she didn't even do it publicly. No Instagram post, no podcast reveal, no special, no sit down, nothing. She changed it for herself, not to make a point, not to hurt anyone, not for attention, just freedom. And that's what makes it so dangerous to people who need to be needed. It's one thing to be left, it's another to be erased. And like that, the last tie was cut. The man who once had 4 wives, who called himself the leader of a celestial family, suddenly sits on a broken throne. And one of the women who supported him most from the start has already written her final chapter, without needing him in a single line. When Christine walked away, she did it loud, bold, her bags packed, her smile wide. She looked straight into the cameras and gave sister wives the kind of storyline producers dream of, a redemption arc in motion. She spoke her truth, found new love, planned a wedding special, and lived her next chapter in full color, under the lights on her own terms. Fans cheered, TLC rejoiced. And even Kody, furious as he was, still got to be part of the narrative he craved so badly. He could be the scorned husband. He could deliver speeches about betrayal. He could perform pain while the cameras rolled. But when Janelle left, it wasn't for spectacle. It wasn't to prove a point. It wasn't even to fall in love. It was because something inside her snapped, and she slipped out of the spotlight in the only way that truly shook him. Quietly. And that's the difference that cuts deepest. Christine told the whole world. Janelle told no one. And yet somehow her departure stung more. Because Christine's exit gave Kody something to push against. He could argue. He could spin. He could fight for control over the version of events that lived on camera. But Janelle robbed him of that power. She took her story and walked it into the dark, far from producers, far from confessionals, far from Robyn's stage tears. Janelle walked away without an audience, and that became her loudest act of rebellion. This wasn't about escape with flair. This was about escape with purpose. Christine wanted the audience to see her joy. Janelle wanted to protect hers. The contrast is blinding. Christine, bathed in rose petals, surrounded by her girls, marrying a man who adores her and doesn't hide it. Janelle, in the shadows, locking away her peace from cameras that once demanded too much of her soul. And for Robyn, the woman who sat so comfortably in her castle while the others unraveled, it's a nightmare. Because for the first time, the story isn't hers to tell or fix. She can't slap on another group talk. She can't call for unity. She can't spin this into a family breakdown that could still be healed if everyone just tried harder. There is no group to fix. There are no wives left to prod. And the one she thought she could still win back has vanished into silence, with her heart, her dignity, and her name intact. 2 exits, 2 styles, but only one truth: Kody didn't lose them to new men. He lost them the moment they saw him clearly, and once that happened, no amount of spin could bring them back. For a long time, Janelle played the role nobody glamorized, but everyone depended on. She was the financial backbone, the budgeter, the quiet one who made sure the bills got paid while the rest of the family got distracted by emotions, entitlement, and empty dreams. But while Kody was obsessing over control and Robyn was collecting stability, Janelle was planning something smarter. She wasn't throwing tantrums. She wasn't begging to be seen. She was moving with precision, quiet, careful, and intentional. And by the time anyone noticed, she had already separated everything that could be separated. The truth is, money was always one of the most twisted parts of the Brown family dynamic. Every big decision, whether it was moving to Flagstaff, buying Robyn's mansion, or investing in Coyote Pass, somehow always came back to Janelle footing the practical load. She cashed out her retirement. She contributed her equity when the Vegas houses sold. And when there wasn't enough money to go around, it was Janelle who made it stretch. She did it because it was what she believed good wives did. Because she thought loyalty meant leaning in even when it hurt. But one by one, she started to realize she was building something she wouldn't even get to keep. While Robyn was living in a nearly $1 million home with custom decor, Janelle was moving into an RV on raw land with no plumbing. And somehow, she was still the one expected to contribute equally to a vision that had always seemed just out of reach for her kids, her comfort, and her peace. So, she stopped playing the game. Janelle quietly restructured her business. Her association with the family LLC, gone, her Plexus business, moved under her own management, her deposits shifted, her accounts separated. Everything that once moved through Kody or the so-called family pot was now hers alone. And she did it without noise. No family meeting, no money war, no on-camera debates. Kody didn't even see it happening because he wasn't looking. He was too busy trying to force submission, too busy delivering lectures about loyalty, too busy basking in Robyn's unwavering support. And by the time he did notice, control had already shifted, not just emotionally, financially. That's what nobody talks about enough. Leaving isn't just emotional, it's logistical, and Janelle played the long game. While everyone thought she was stuck, she was planning her freedom in spreadsheets and savings accounts no one else could touch. That's why she didn't need to sell her wedding for a TLC payout. That's why she could walk away from the cameras, the reunion specials, the storyline. Because for the first time in years, she didn't need anyone's approval or check. She had finally untied the dollar-shaped knots that held her in place. And control, that crown Kody always thought was his, it's now in the hands of the woman who built the dynasty. And then walked away from it richer than he ever. For years, they stayed quiet. While the family tore itself apart in front of cameras, Janelle's sons, Gabriel, Garrison, Hunter stood back, watching, absorbing, hoping that maybe, with enough time, their dad would show up again. Not for a storyline or a lecture, but as a father. A real one. The kind that remembers birthdays, shows up during hard seasons, and listens without turning everything into a power test. But that man never came. And eventually, the silence broke. One by one, these boys, now grown men, began speaking up. And when they did, the veneer Kody had spent seasons building started to crack. Not through scandal, not through a dramatic walk-off, but through the raw honesty of children who had nothing left to lose. Gabriel, once the soft-hearted middle child, shared the moment his father forgot his birthday during the pandemic. Not that he was forgotten in passing, he was actively ignored. As COVID guidelines turned into loyalty scorecards, Gabe became the collateral damage in a war he never asked to fight. When he tearfully told producers, "He didn't even call on my birthday," it wasn't drama. It was devastation. Then came Garrison, strong-willed, practical, and no longer afraid to push back. When tensions rose about independence, rules, and where Kody really spent his time, Garrison stood firm. He questioned, he challenged, and in doing so, he exposed the quiet favoritism that had become impossible to ignore. Robyn's children had full emotional access. Janelle's sons, they were expected to fall in line or disappear. And then there's Hunter, silent no more. The once composed, oldest of Janelle's boys, stepped into his own awakening. The son who had sacrificed so much during the family's many moves. The one who worked hard to represent the family publicly during his years in the military and college finally looked up and realized his father wasn't looking back anymore. Every word these young men spoke wasn't for attention. It was for truth. And the truth was clear: the more they matured, the less tolerance they had for manipulation, inequality, and emotional neglect. They weren't just choosing independence. They were choosing their mother. And that's what shook Kody in a way no wife ever did. Because Kody always believed the children would see him as the leader. He believed they'd come around, once the dust settled. But they didn't. They saw it all, every broken promise, every shift of blame, every empty speech. They aren't little boys anymore. They're men. And they're standing with the woman who stood by them through it all. Not with the man who claims he's been wronged, but never showed up to make it right. And now, the family narrative is shifting, not through wife rebellion, but through the voices of the very children he thought would come back. But they've already moved on, and they're not looking back. Somewhere quiet, far from the lights, the cameras, and the chaos, a wedding happened. Not a spectacle, not a season finale. Not a two-part TLC special with confessional tears and drone shots. No microphones, no producers, no drama, just Janelle and peace. For the first time in her adult life, she stood in white, without waiting for permission, without asking for understanding, without carrying anyone else's expectations. The exact location? Still unknown. Insiders say even family didn't know until the last minute. A private venue. Maybe a home rental in southern Utah. Maybe a mountaintop hideaway with just enough trees to blur the view from cameras and drones. No posted addresses, no Instagram hints, no stylists sharing sneak peeks. It was locked down so tightly, sources say guests were asked to hand over their phones at the door, not because Janelle was being secretive, but because she was finally protecting something that mattered only to her. They say the ceremony was small, simple, a tight guest list of people who had earned space in her new life, not people who demanded it from her past. Christine, rumored to be there, glowing, supportive, standing not just as a friend, but a witness to this full-circle moment. Mary, possibly, a silent guest, a silent nod, but none of that made headlines. What made the loudest noise was the absence. Kody, not there. Robyn, not mentioned. TLC, locked out. The kids who showed up weren't worried about airtime. They weren't rushing through glam. They were standing beside their mother, proud. You could almost feel the shift in power just in who stood at that altar and who couldn't find it on a map. And then, the ring. Sources say it wasn't flashy. Unlike the old wedding jewelry Kody once brought out in boxes, clunky, controlling, designed to feel symbolic but always cheapened by ego, this ring was minimal. Real diamonds, real clarity, a band that said commitment without screaming for attention. Not heavy, not tangled in symbolism. It fit her because it wasn't chosen to make a religious statement or bind her to a kingdom. It was simply a promise, a real one. That's what makes this wedding more powerful than anything Sister Wives has ever filmed. Because this wasn't for a storyline, it was for her soul. And the story people wanted to watch, the laughter they wanted to critique, the confessionals they expected, they were shut out, for the first time, because behind that locked door was freedom. And no one from her past was getting in. There was no dramatic exit, no final monologue, no camera catching her retreat down a long hallway with tears in her eyes. Instead, there's just a quiet, and its weight is crushing. Janelle never yelled, she never lashed out. She simply vanished from the narrative Kody thought would always revolve around him. And now, with the story nearing its end, he's discovering something no patriarch wants to hear. He's no longer the main character. The man who once stood in the center of 5 households now walks through a cavernous home filled with silence and regret. The son he pushed away doesn't call. The daughter doesn't answer. The women he once believed were tethered to him forever have faded from his life so completely, it's like they were written out without warning. But they weren't erased. They left on purpose. And standing in the deepest void of all is the absence of Janelle, not because she left, but because she left without needing to say goodbye. That's what cuts the deepest. That's what makes this feel like the final blow. Christine's departure was loud and public. He felt it, but he fueled it. But Janelle didn't argue. She didn't play the game of who was right, who was faithful, who was fair. She just went quiet. and in her silence, she finally found what none of them ever had in that house. Peace. It's that calm, controlled exit that fans are calling the ultimate act of strength. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need applause. She just needed out, without giving him the satisfaction of being part of the farewell. And when that news of her name change leaked, when the cameras realized there wouldn't be a wedding special, when Kody finally understood that no, he wasn't invited, not even as a symbolic gesture, it was over. Not just the marriage, not just the storyline, but the illusion that this family could ever return to what it once was. Because the history that once bound them together is being rewritten quietly by the ones who no longer buy into the legacy. And Janelle picked up the pen the moment she stopped explaining herself. So what happens to the show now? Do viewers still tune in to watch the man who lost it all? Will they follow a season with only Robyn at his side, defending a family that hardly exists anymore? Or is Sister Wives now about something else entirely? About women finding ways to free themselves from systems that never protected them? Maybe it's not a breakup story after all. Maybe it's a survival one. So here's what I want to know from you. Should TLC keep filming without Janelle? Or has the story already ended the moment she closed that door? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them all. And remember, strength doesn't always sound like a shout. Sometimes, it sounds like silence, followed by footsteps moving in a new direction.